first 25,000 years? I know you can't make suggestions. Can you give me any comment on this at all? RA, I am RA. The choices are yours according to your discernment. I am RA. I leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Adonai. 200. The Law of One, Book I, Session 21. February 10, 1981. RA, I am RA. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator. I communicate now. Questioner, I have a couple of questions that I don't want to forget to ask in this period, so I will ask them first. The first question is, would the future content of this book be affected in any way if the instrument reads the material that we have already obtained? RA, I am RA. The future, as you measure in time/space, communications which we offer through this instrument have no connection with the instrument's mind complex. This is due to two things. First, the fidelity of the instrument in dedicating its will to the service of the infinite Creator. Secondly, the distortion/understanding of our social memory complex that the most efficient way to communicate material with as little distortion as possible, given the necessity of the use of sound vibration complexes, is to remove the conscious mind complex from the spirit/mind/body complex so that we may communicate without reference to any instruments. Orientation. Questioner, do you use the instrument's vocabulary or your own vocabulary to communicate with us? RA, I am RA. We use the vocabulary of the language with which you are familiar. This is not the instrument's vocabulary. However, this particular mind/body/spirit complex retains the use of a sufficiently large number of sound vibration complexes that the distinction is often without any importance. Questioner, so at the start of this 75,000-year cycle we know that the quarantine was fully set up. I am assuming then that the guardians were aware of the infringements on the free will that would occur if they didn't set this up at that time and therefore did it. Is this correct? RA, I am RA. This is partially incorrect. The incorrectness is as follows. Those entities whose third density experience upon your red planet was brought to a close prematurely were aided genetically while being transferred to this third density. This, although done in a desire to aid, was seen as infringement upon free will. The light quarantine, which consists of the guardians, or gardeners as you may call them, which would have been in effect, was intensified. Questioner, when the 75,000-year cycle started, the lifespan was approximately 900 years, average. What was the process and scheduling mechanism, shall I say, of reincarnation at that time, and how did the time in between incarnations into third density physical apply to the growth of the mind/body/spirit complex? RA, I am RA. This query is more complex than most. We shall begin. The incarnation pattern of the beginning third density mind/body/spirit complex begins in darkness, for you may think or consider of your density as one of, as you may say, a sleep and a forgetting. This is the only plane of forgetting. It is necessary for the third density entity to forget so that the mechanisms of confusion or free will may operate upon the newly individuated consciousness complex. Thus, the beginning entity is one in all innocence oriented towards animalistic behavior using other selves only as extensions of self for the preservation of the all-self. The entity becomes slowly aware that it has needs, shall we say, that are not animalistic, that is, that are useless for survival. These needs include the need for companionship, the need for laughter, the need for beauty, the need to know the universe about it. These are the beginning needs. As the incarnations begin to accumulate, other needs are discovered: the need to trade, the need to love, the need to be loved, the need to elevate animalistic behaviors to a more universal perspective. During the first portion of third density cycles, incarnations are automatic and occur rapidly upon the cessation of energy complex of the physical vehicle. There is small need to review or to heal the experiences of the incarnation. As, what you would call, the energy centers begin to be activated to a higher extent, more of the content of experience during incarnation deals with the lessons of love. Thus the time, as you may understand it, between incarnations is lengthened to give appropriate attention to the review and the healing of experiences of the previous incarnation. At some point in third density, the green ray energy center becomes activated, and at that point incarnation ceases to be automatic. Questioner: when incarnation ceases to be automatic, I am assuming that the entity can decide when he needs to incarnate for the benefit of his own learning. Does he also select his parents? IMRA. This is correct. Questioner: at this time in our cycle, near the end, what percentage of the entities incarnating are making their own choices? IMRA. The approximate percentage is 54%. Questioner: thank you. During this first 25,000-year cycle, was there any industrial development at all, any machinery available to the people? IMRA. Using the term machine to the meaning which you ascribe, the answer is no. However, there were, shall we say, various implements of wood and rock which were used in order to obtain food and for use in aggression. Questioner: at the end of this first 25,000-year cycle, was there any physical change that occurred rapidly like that which occurs at the end of a 75,000-year cycle, or is this just an indexing time for harvesting period? IMRA. There was no change except that which, according to intelligent energy, or what you may term physical evolution, suited physical complexes to their environment, this being of the color of the skin due to the area of the sphere upon which entities lived, the gradual growth of peoples due to improved intake of foodstuffs. Questioner: then, at the end of the first 25,000-year period, I am guessing that the Guardians discovered that there was no harvest of either positively or negatively oriented entities. Tell me then what happened. What action was taken? IMRA. There was no action taken except to remain aware of the possibility of a calling for help or understanding among the entities of this density. The Confederation is concerned with the preservation of the conditions conducive to learning. This, for the most part, revolves about the primal distortion of free will. Questioner: then the Confederation gardeners did nothing until some of the plants in their garden called them for help. Is this correct? IMRA. This is correct. Questioner: when did the first call occur, and how did it occur? IMRA. The first calling was approximately 46,000 of your years ago. This calling was of those of Maldek. These entities were aware of their need for rectifying the consequences of their action and were in some confusion in an incarnate state as to the circumstances of their incarnation, the unconscious being aware, the conscious being quite confused. This created a calling. The Confederation sent love and light to these entities. Questioner: how did the Confederation send this love and light? What did they do? IMRA. There dwell within the Confederation planetary entities who from their planetary spheres do nothing but send love and light as pure streamings to those who call. This is not in the form of conceptual thought but of pure and undifferentiated love. Questioner: did the first distortion of the law of one then require that equal time, shall I say, be given to the self-service oriented group? IMRA. In this case, this was not necessary for some of your time due to the orientation of the entities. Questioner: what was their orientation? IMRA. The orientation of these entities was such that the aid of the Confederation was not perceived. Questioner: since it was not perceived, it was not necessary to balance this. Is that correct? IMRA. This is correct. What is necessary to balance is opportunity. When there is ignorance, there is no opportunity. When there exists a potential, then each opportunity shall be balanced, this balancing caused by not only the positive and negative orientations of those offering aid, but also the orientation of those requesting aid. Questioner: thank you very much. I apologize in being so stupid in stating my questions, but this has cleared up my understanding nicely. Then in the second 25,000-year major cycle, was there any great civilization that developed? IMRA. In the sense of greatness of technology, there were no great societies during this cycle. There was some advancement among those of Deneb who had chosen to incarnate as a body in what you would call China. There were appropriately positive steps in activating the green ray energy complex in many portions of your planetary sphere, including the Americas, the continent which you call Africa, the island which you call Australia, and that which you know as India, as well as various scattered peoples. None of these became what you would name great, as the greatness of Lemuria or Atlantis is known to you due to the formation of strong social complexes and, in the case of Atlantis, very great technological understandings. However, in the South American area of your planetary sphere, as you know it, there grew to be a great vibratory distortion towards love. These entities were harvestable at the end of the second major cycle without ever having formed strong social or technological complexes. This will be the final question in completion of this session. Is there a query we may answer quickly before we close, as this instrument is somewhat depleted? Questioner, I would just like to apologize for the confusion on my part in carrying on to this second 25,000 years. I would like to ask if there is anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? We would like to have a second session today. IMRA. You may observe a slight misalignment between book, candle, and perpendicularity of sensor. This is not significant, but as we have said, the cumulative effects upon this instrument are not well. You are conscientious. It is well to have a second session given the appropriate exercising and manipulation of this instrument's physical complex. IMRA. I leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. 205. The Law of One, Book I, Session 22. February 10, 1981. IMRA. I greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. I communicate now. Questioner, I will ask a couple of questions to clear up the end of the second major cycle. Then we will go on to the third and last of the major cycles. Can you tell me what was the average lifespan at the end of the second major cycle? IMRA. By the end of the second major cycle, the lifespan was as you know it, with certain variations among geographically isolated peoples more in harmony with intelligent energy and less bellicose. Questioner, can you tell me the length of the average lifespan in years at the end of the second major cycle? IMRA. The average is perhaps misleading. To be precise, many spent approximately 35 to 40 of your years in one incarnation, with the possibility not considered abnormal of a lifespan approaching 100 of your years. Questioner, can I assume then that this drastic drop in average lifespan from 700 years to less than 100 years in length during this second 25,000 years was caused by an intensification of a lack of service to others? IMRA. This is in part correct. By the end of the second cycle, the law of responsibility had begun to be effectuated by the increasing ability of entities to grasp those lessons which there are to be learned in this density. Thus, entities had discovered many ways to indicate a bellicose nature, not only as tribes or what you call nations, but in personal relationships, each with the other, the concept of barter having given way to the concept of money, also, the concept of ownership having won ascendancy over the concept of non-ownership on an individual or group basis. Each entity then was offered many more subtle ways of demonstrating either service toward others or service to self with the distortion of the manipulation of others. As each lesson was understood, those lessons of sharing, of giving, of receiving in free gratitude, each lesson could be rejected in practice. Without demonstrating the fruits of such learn/teaching, the lifespan became greatly reduced, for the ways of honor/duty were not being accepted. Questioner, would this shortened lifespan help the entity in any way, in that he would have more time in between incarnations to review his mistakes, or would this shortened lifespan hinder him? IMRA. Both are correct. The shortening of the lifespan is a distortion of the law of one, which suggests that an entity not receive more experience in more intensity than it may bear. This is only an effect upon an individual level and does not hold sway over planetary or social complexes. Thus, the shortened lifespan is due to the necessity for removing an entity from the intensity of experience which ensues when wisdom and love are, having been rejected, reflected back into the consciousness of the Creator without being accepted as part of the self, this then causing the entity to have the need for healing and for much evaluation of the incarnation. The incorrectness lies in the truth that, given appropriate circumstances, a much longer incarnation in your space/time continuum is very helpful for continuing this intensive work until conclusions have been reached through the catalytic process. Questioner, you spoke of the South American group which was harvestable at the end of the second cycle. How long was their average lifespan at the end of the second cycle? IMRA. This isolated group had achieved lifespans stretching upwards towards the 900-year lifespan appropriate to this density. Questioner, I am assuming that the planetary action that we are experiencing now, which it seems shortens all lifespans here, was not strong enough then to affect them and shorten their lifespan. Is this correct? IMRA. This is correct. It is well to remember that at that nexus in space/time great isolation was possible. Questioner, how many people populated the Earth totally at that time, that is, were incarnate in the physical at any one time? IMRA. I am assuming that you intend to query regarding the number of incarnate mind/body/spirit complexes at the end of the second major cycle, this number being approximately 345,000 entities. Questioner, approximately how many were harvestable out of that total number at the end of the cycle? IMRA. There were approximately 150 entities harvestable. Questioner, then as the next cycle started, were these the entities who stayed to work on the planet? IMRA. These entities were visited by the Confederation and became desirous of remaining in order to aid the planetary consciousness. This is correct. Questioner, what type of visit did the Confederation make to this group of 150 entities? IMRA. A light being appeared bearing that which may be called a shield of light. It spoke of the oneness and infinity of all creation and of those things which await those ready for harvest. It described in golden words the beauties of love as lived. It then allowed a telepathic linkage to progressively show those who were interested the plight of third density when seen as a planetary complex. It then left. Questioner, did all of these entities then decide to stay and help during the next 25,000-year cycle? IMRA. This is correct. As a group they stayed. There were those peripherally associated with this culture which did not stay. However, they were not able to be harvested either, and so, beginning at the very highest, shall we say, of the sub-octaves of third density, repeated this density. Many of those who have been of the loving nature are not wanderers, but those of this particular origin of second cycle. Questioner, are all of these entities still with us in this cycle? IMRA. The entities repeating the third density major cycle have, in some few cases, been able to leave. These entities have chosen to join their brothers and sisters, as you would call these entities. Questioner, are any of these entities names that we would know from our historical past? IMRA. The one known as Sound Vibration Complex, St. Augustine, is of such a nature. The one known as St. Teresa of such a nature. The one known as St. Francis of Assisi of such nature. These entities, being of monastic background, as you would call it, found incarnation in the same type of ambience appropriate for further learning. Questioner, as the cycle terminated 25,000 years ago, what was the reaction of the Confederation to the lack of harvest? IMRA. We became concerned. Questioner, was any action taken immediately, or did you wait for a call? IMRA. The Council of Saturn acted only in allowing the entry into third density of other mind/body/spirit complexes of third density, not wanderers, but those who sought further third density experience. This was done randomly so that free will would not be violated, for there was not yet a call. Questioner, was the next action taken by the Confederation when a call occurred? IMRA. This is correct. Questioner, who or what group produced this call, and what action was taken by the Confederation? IMRA. The calling was that of Atlanteans. This calling was for what you would call understanding, with the distortion towards helping other selves. The action taken is that which you take part in at this time, the impression of information through channels, as you would call them. Questioner, was this first calling then at a time before Atlantis became technologically advanced? IMRA. This is basically correct. Questioner, then did the technological advancement of Atlantis come because of this call? I am assuming that the call was answered to bring them the law of one and the law of love as a distortion of the law of one, but did they also then get technological information that caused them to grow into such a highly advanced technological society? IMRA. Not at first. At about the same time as we first appeared in the skies over Egypt and continuing thereafter, other entities of the Confederation appeared unto Atlanteans who had reached a level of philosophical understanding, shall we misuse this word, which was consonant with communication, to encourage and inspire studies in the mystery of unity. However, requests being made for healing and other understanding, information was passed having to do with crystals and the building of pyramids as well as temples, as you would call them, which were associated with training. Questioner, was this training the same sort of initiatory training that was done with Egyptians? IMRA. This training was different in that the social complex was more, shall we say, sophisticated and less contradictory and barbarous in its ways of thinking. Therefore the temples were temples of learning rather than the attempt being made to totally separate and put upon a pedestal the healers. Questioner, then were there what we call priests trained in these temples? IMRA. You would not call them priests in the sense of celibacy, of obedience, and of poverty. They were priests in the sense of those devoted to learning. The difficulties became apparent as those trained in this learning began to attempt to use crystal powers for those things other than healing, as they were involved not only with learning but became involved with what you would call the governmental structure. Questioner, was all of their information given to them in the same way that we are getting our information now, through an instrument such as this instrument? IMRA. There were visitations from time to time, but none of importance in the, shall we say, historical passage of events in your space/time continuum. Questioner, was it necessary for them to have a unified social complex for these visitations to occur? What conditions were necessary for these visitations to occur? IMRA. The conditions were two: the calling of a group of people whose square overcame the integrated resistance of those unwilling to search or learn. The second requirement, the relative naivete of those members of the Confederation who felt that direct transfer of information would necessarily be as helpful for Atlanteans as it had been for the Confederation entity. Questioner, I see then. What you are saying is that these naive Confederation entities had had the same thing happen to them in the past, so they were doing the same thing for the Atlantean entities. Is this correct? IMRA. This is correct. We remind you that we are one of the naive members of that confederation and are still attempting to recoup the damage for which we feel responsibility. It is our duty as well as honor to continue with your peoples, therefore, until all traces of the distortions of our teach/learnings have been embraced by their opposite distortions and balance achieved. Questioner, I see. Then I will state the picture I have of Atlantis and you tell me if I am correct. We have a condition where a large enough percentage of the people of Atlantis had started at least going in the direction of the law of one and living the law of one for their call to be heard by the Confederation. This call was heard because, using the law of squares, it overrode the opposition of the Atlantean entities who were not calling. The Confederation then used channels such as we use now in communication and also made contact directly, but this turned out to be a mistake because it was perverted by the entities of Atlantis. Is this correct? IMRA. This is correct with one exception. There is only one law. That is the law of one. Other so-called laws are distortions of this law, some of them primal and most important for progress to be understood. However, it is well that each so-called law, which we also call way, be understood as a distortion rather than a law. There is no multiplicity to the law of one. This will be the final question in length of this working. Please ask it now. Questioner, can you give me the average lifespan of the Atlantean population? IMRA. The average lifespan, as we have said, is misleading. The Atlanteans were, in the early part of their cultural experience, used to lifespans from 70 to 140 years, this being, of course, approximate. Due to increasing desire for power, the lifetime decreased rapidly in the later stages of the civilization and, thus, the healing and rejuvenating information was requested. Do you have any brief queries before we close? Questioner, is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? Is there anything that we can do for her? RA. The instrument is well. It is somewhat less easy to maintain clear contact during a time when some or one of the entities in the circle of working is or are not fully conscious. We request that entities in the circle be aware that their energy is helpful for increasing the vitality of this contact. We thank you for being conscientious in the asking. IMRA. It is a great joy to leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. 211. The Law of One, Book I, Session 23. February 11, 1981. IMRA. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator. We communicate now. Questioner, you were speaking yesterday of the first contact made by the Confederation which occurred during our third major cycle. You stated that you appeared in the skies over Egypt at approximately the same time that aid was given to Atlantis. Can you tell me why you went to Egypt and your orientation of attitude and thinking when you first went to Egypt? IMRA. At the time of which you speak, there were those who chose to worship the hawk-headed sun god, which you know as vibrational sound complex, Horus. This vibrational sound complex has taken other vibrational sound complexes, the object of worship being the sun disk represented in some distortion. We were drawn to spend some time, as you would call it, scanning the peoples for a serious interest amounting to a seeking with which we might help without infringement. We found that at that time the social complex was quite self-contradictory in its so-called religious beliefs and, therefore, there was not an appropriate calling for our vibration. Thus, at that time, which you know of as approximately 18,000 of your years in the past, we departed without taking action. Questioner, you stated yesterday that you appeared in the skies over Egypt at that time. Were the Egyptian entities able to see you in their skies? IMRA. This is correct. Questioner, what did they see, and how did this affect their attitudes? IMRA. They saw what you would speak of as crystal-powered bell-shaped craft. This did not affect them due to their firm conviction that many wondrous things occurred as a normal part of a world, as you would call it, in which many deities had powerful control over supernatural events. Questioner, did you have a reason for being visible to them rather than being invisible? IMRA. This is correct. Questioner, can you tell me your reason for being visible to them? IMRA. We allowed visibility because it did not make any difference. Questioner, then at this time you did not contact them. Can you answer the same question that I just asked with respect to your next attempt to contact the Egyptians? IMRA. The next attempt was prolonged. It occurred over a period of time. The nexus, or center, of our efforts was a decision upon our parts that there was a sufficient calling to attempt to walk among your peoples as brothers. We laid this plan before the Council of Saturn, offering ourselves as service-oriented wanderers of the type which land directly upon the inner planes without incarnative processes. Thus we emerged, or materialized, in physical-chemical complexes representing as closely as possible our natures, this effort being to appear as brothers and spend a limited amount of time as teachers of the Law of One, for there was an ever stronger interest in the sun body, and this vibrates in concordance with our particular distortions. We discovered that for each word we could utter, there were 30 impressions we gave by our very being, which confused those entities we had come to serve. After a short period, we removed ourselves from these entities and spent much time attempting to understand how best to serve those to whom we had offered ourselves in love/light. The ones who were in contact with that geographical entity, which you know of as Atlantis, had conceived of the potentials for healing by use of the pyramid-shaped entities. In considering this and making adjustments for the difference as in the distortion complexes of the two geographical cultures, as you would call them, we went before the council again, offering this plan to the council as an aid to the healing and the longevity of those in the area you know of as Egypt. In this way, we hope to facilitate the learning process as well as offer philosophy articulating the law of one. Again, the council approved. Approximately 11,000 of your years ago we entered, by thought form, we correct this instrument. We sometimes have difficulty due to low vitality. Approximately 8,500 years ago, having considered these concepts carefully, we returned, never having left in thought, to the thought form areas of your vibrational planetary complex and considered for some of your years, as you measure time, how to appropriately build these structures. The first, the Great Pyramid, was formed approximately 6,000 of your years ago. Then, in sequence, after this performing by thought of the building or architecture of the Great Pyramid using the more, shall we say, local or earthly material rather than thought form material to build other pyramidal structures. This continued for approximately 1,500 of your years. Meanwhile, the information concerning initiation and healing by crystal was being given. The one known as Akhenaten was able to perceive this information without significant distortion and for a time, moved, shall we say, heaven and earth in order to invoke the law of one and to order the priesthood of these structures in accordance with the distortions of initiation and true compassionate healing. This was not to be long-lasting. At this entity's physical dissolution from your third density physical plane, as we have said before, our teachings became quickly perverted, our structures once again went to the use of the so-called royal or those with distortions towards power. Questioner, when you spoke of pyramid healing, I am assuming that the primary healing was for the mind. Is this correct? IMRA. This is partially correct. The healing, if it is to be effectuated, must be a funneling without significant distortion of the in-streamings through the spiritual complex into the tree of mind. There are parts of this mind which block energies flowing to the body complex. In each case, in each entity, the blockage may well differ. However, it is necessary to activate the sense of the spiritual channel or shuttle. Then whether the blockage is from spiritual to mental or from mental to physical, or whether it may simply be a random and purely physical trauma, healing may then be carried out. Questioner, when you started building the pyramid at Giza using thought, were you at that time in contact with incarnate Egyptians and did they observe this building? IMRA. At that time we were not in close contact with incarnate entities upon your plane. We were responding to a general calling of sufficient energy in that particular location to merit action. We sent thoughts to all who were seeking our information. The appearance of the pyramid was a matter of tremendous surprise. However, it was carefully designed to coincide with the incarnation of one known as a great architect. This entity was later made into a deity, in part due to this occurrence. Questioner, what name did they give this deity? IMRA. This deity had the sound vibration complex Imhotep. Questioner, what can you tell me about the overall success of the pyramid? I understand that the pyramids were not successful in producing a rise in consciousness that was hoped for, but there must have been some success that came from them. IMRA. We ask you to remember that we are of the brothers and sisters of sorrow. When one has been rescued from that sorrow to a vision of the one Creator, then there is no concept of failure. Our difficulty lay in the honor/responsibility of correcting the distortions of the law of one which occurred during our attempts to aid these entities. The distortions are seen as responsibilities rather than failures. The few who were inspired to seek our only reason for the attempt. Thus, we would perhaps be in the position of paradox in that, as one saw an illumination, we were what you call successful, and as others became more sorrowful and confused, we were failures. These are your terms. We persist in seeking to serve. Questioner, can you tell me what happened to Akhenaten after his physical death? IMRA. This entity was then put through the series of healing and review of incarnational experiences which is appropriate for third density experience. This entity had been somewhat in the distortions of power ameliorated by the great devotion to the law of one. This entity thus resolved to enter a series of incarnations in which it had no distortions towards power. Questioner, can you tell me what the average lifespan was for the Egyptians at the time of Akhenaten? IMRA. The average lifespan of these people was approximately 35 to 50 of your years. There was much, what you would call, disease of a physical complex nature. Questioner, Can you tell me of the reasons for the disease? I think I already know, but I think it might be good for the book to state this at this time. IMRA. This is, as we have mentioned before, not particularly informative with regard to the law of one. However, the land you know of as Egypt at that time was highly barbarous in its living conditions, as you would call them. The river which you call Nile was allowed to flood and to recede, thus providing the fertile grounds for the breeding of diseases which may be carried by insects. Also, the preparation of foodstuffs allowed diseases to form. Also, there was difficulty in many cases with sources of water, and water which was taken caused disease due to the organisms therein. Questioner, I was really questioning about the more basic cause of disease rather than the mechanism of its transmission. I was going back to the root of thought that created the possibility of disease. Could you briefly tell me if I am correct in assuming the general reduction of thought over the long time on planet Earth with respect to the law of one created a condition whereby what we call disease could develop? Is this correct? IMRA. This is correct and perceptive. You, as questioner, begin now to penetrate the outer teachings. The root cause in this particular society was not so much a bellicose action, although there were, shall we say, tendencies, but rather the formation of a money system and a very active trading and development of those tendencies towards greed and power, thus, the enslaving of entities by other entities and the misapprehension of the creator within each entity. Questioner, I understand, if I am correct, that a South American contact was also made. Can you tell me of the nature of your contact with respect to the attitude about the contact, its ramifications, the plan for the contact, and why the people were contacted in South America? IMRA. This will be the final full question of this session. The entities who walked among those in your South American continent were called by a similar desire upon the part of the entities therein to learn of the manifestations of the sun. They worshipped this source of light and life. Thus, these entities were visited by light beings not unlike ourselves. Instructions were given and they were more accepted and less distorted than ours. The entities themselves began to construct a series of underground and hidden cities, including pyramid structures. These pyramids were somewhat at variance from the design that we had promulgated. However, the original ideas were the same, with the addition of a desire or intention of creating places of meditation and rest, a feeling of the presence of the one creator, these pyramids then being for all people, not only initiates and those to be healed. They left this density when it was discovered that their plans were solidly in motion and, in fact, had been recorded. During the next approximately 3,500 years, these plans became, though somewhat distorted, in a state of near completion in many aspects. Therefore, as is the case of the breakings of the quarantine, the entity who was helping the South American entities along the South American ways, you call in part the Amazon River, went before the Council of Saturn to request a second attempt to correct in person the distortions which had occurred in their plans. This having been granted, this entity or social memory complex returned, and the entity chosen as messenger came among the peoples once more to correct the errors. Again, all was recorded and the entity rejoined its social memory complex and left your skies. As in our experience, the teachings were, for the most part, greatly and grossly perverted to the extent in later times of actual human sacrifice rather than healing of humans. Thus, the social memory complex is also given the honor/duty of remaining until those distortions are worked out of the distortion complexes of your peoples. May we ask if there are any questions of a brief nature before we close? Questioner, is there anything we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? Since you stated that she seems to be low on energy, is it possible to have another session later on today? IMRA. All is well with alignments. However, this instrument would benefit from rest from the trance state for this diurnal period. IMRA. I leave this instrument now. I leave each of you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. 217. The Law of One, Book I, Session 24. February 15, 1981. IMRA. Questioner, we are a little concerned about the physical condition of the instrument. She has a slight congestion. If you can tell me of the advisability of the session, I would appreciate it. IMRA. This instrument's vital energies of the physical complex are low. The session will be appropriately shortened. Questioner, in the last session you mentioned that in this last 25,000 year cycle the Atlanteans, Egyptians, and those in South America were contacted and then the Confederation departed. I understand that the Confederation did not come back for some time. Could you tell me of the reasons, consequences, and attitudes with respect to the next contact with those here on planet Earth? IMRA. In the case of the Atlanteans, enlargements upon the information given resulted in those activities distorted towards bellicosity, which resulted in the final second Atlantean catastrophe 10,821 of your years in the past, as you measure time. Many were displaced due to societal actions, both upon Atlantis and upon those areas of what you would call North African deserts to which some Atlanteans had gone after the first conflict. Earth changes continued due to these, what you would call nuclear bombs and other crystal weapons, sinking the last great landmasses approximately 9,600 of your years ago. In the Egyptian and the South American experiments, results, though not as widely devastating, were as far from the original intention of the Confederation. It was clear to not only us, but also to the Council and the Guardians that our methods were not appropriate for this particular sphere. Our attitude thus was one of caution, observation, and continuing attempts to creatively discover methods whereby contact from our entities could be of service with the least distortion and above all with the least possibility of becoming perversions or antitheses of our intention in sharing information. Questioner, thank you. Then I assume that the Confederation stayed away from Earth for a period of time. What condition created the next contact that the Confederation made? IMRA. In approximately 3,600 of your years in the past, as you measure time, there was an influx of those of the Orion group, as you call them. Due to the increasing negative influences upon thinking and acting distortions, they were able to begin working with those whose impression from olden times, as you may say, was that they were special and different. An entity of the Confederation, many thousands of your years in the past, the one you may call Yahweh, had, by genetic cloning, set up these particular biases among these peoples who had come gradually to dwell in the vicinity of Egypt, as well as in many other places, by dispersion after the downsinking of the landmass Mu. Here the Orion group found fertile soil in which to plant the seeds of negativity, these seeds, as always, being those of the elite, the different, those who manipulate or enslave others. The one known as Yahweh felt a great responsibility to these entities. However, the Orion group had been able to impress upon the peoples the name Yahweh as the one responsible for this elitism. Yahweh then was able to take what you would call stock of its vibratory patterns and became, in effect, a more eloquently effective sound vibration complex. In this complex the old Yahweh, now unnamed, but meaning he comes, began to send positively oriented philosophy. This was approximately, in your past, of 3,300 years. Thus, the intense portion of what has become known as Armageddon was joined. Questioner, how did the Orion group get through the quarantine 3,600 years ago? The random window effect? IMRA. At that time this was not entirely so, as there was a proper calling for this information. When there is a mixed calling, the window effect is much more put into motion by the ways of the densities. The quarantine in this case was, shall we say, not patrolled so closely, due to the lack of strong polarity, the windows thus needing to be very weak in order for penetration. As your harvest approaches, those forces of what you would call light work according to their call. The ones of Orion have the working only according to their call. This calling is in actuality not nearly as great. Thus, due to the way of empowering or squares, there is much resistance to penetration. Yet free will must be maintained, and those desiring negatively oriented information, as you would call it, must then be satisfied by those moving through by the window effect. Questioner, then Yahweh, in an attempt to correct what I might call a mistake, I know you don't want to call it that, started 3,300 years ago a positive philosophy. Were the Orion and Yahweh philosophies impressed telepathically, or were there other techniques used? IMRA. There were two other techniques used, one by the entity no longer called Yahweh, who still felt that if it could raise up entities which were superior to the negative forces, that these superior entities could spread the law of one. Thus this entity, Yod Heshen Vav He, came among your people in form according to incarnate being and mated in the normal reproductive manner of your physical complexes, thus birthing a generation of much larger beings, these beings called Anak. The other method used to greater effect later in the scenario, as you would call it, was the thought form such as we often use among your peoples to suggest the mysterious or the sublime. You may be familiar with some of these appearances. Questioner, could you state some of those? IMRA. This is information which you may discover. However, we will briefly point the way by indicating the so-called wheel within a wheel and the cherubim with sleepless eye. Questioner, did the Orion group use similar methods for their impression 3,600 years ago? IMRA. The group or empire had an emissary in your skies at that time. Questioner, can you describe that emissary? IMRA. This emissary was of your fiery nature, which was hidden by the nature of cloud in the day. This was to obliterate the questions of those seeing such a vehicle and to make it consonant with these entities' concept of what you may call the Creator. Questioner, and then how was the information passed on to the entities after they saw this fiery cloud? IMRA. By thought transfer and by the causing of fiery phenomena and other events to appear as being miraculous through the use of thought forms. Questioner, then are there any prophets that sprang from this era or soon after it that are recorded? IMRA. Those of the empire were not successful in maintaining their presence for long after the approximate 3000 date in your history and were, perforce, left with the decision to physically leave the skies. The so-called prophets were often given mixed information, but the worst that the Orion group could do was to cause these prophets to speak of doom, as prophecy in those days was the occupation of those who love their fellow beings and wish only to be of service to them and to the Creator. Questioner, are you saying that the Orion group was successful in polluting some of the positively oriented prophets' messages with prophecies of doom? IMRA. This is correct. Your next query shall be the last full query for this session. Questioner, could you tell me why the Orion group had to leave after what figures to be a 600-year period? IMRA. Although the impression that they had given to those who called them was that these entities were an elite group, that which you know as diaspora occurred, causing much dispersion of these peoples so that they became an humbler and more honorable breed, less bellicose and more aware of the loving kindness of the one Creator. The creation about them tended towards being somewhat bellicose, somewhat oriented towards the enslavement of others, but they themselves, the target of the Orion group by means of their genetic superiority/weakness, became what you may call the underdogs, thereby letting the feelings of gratitude for their neighbors, their family, and their one Creator begin to heal the feelings of elitism which led to the distortions of power over others which had caused their own bellicosity. Any short queries may be asked now. Questioner, is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? IMRA. You are conscientious. Be careful to adjust this instrument's upper appendages if its upper body is elevated. IMRA. All is well. It is our joy to speak with you. We leave in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. 221. The Law of One, Book I, Session 25. February 16, 1981. IMRA. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator. We communicate now. Questioner, we shall now continue with the material from yesterday. You stated that about 3,000 years ago the Orion group left due to diaspora. Was the Confederation then able to make any progress after the Orion group left? IMRA. For many of your centuries, both the Confederation and the Orion Confederation busied themselves with each other upon planes above your own, shall we say, planes in time/space whereby machinations were conceived and the armor of light girded. Battles have been and are continuing to be fought upon these levels. Upon the Earth plane, energies had been set in motion which did not cause a great deal of call. There were isolated instances of callings, one such taking place beginning approximately 2,600 of your years in the past in what you would call Greece, at this time, and resulting in writings and understandings of some facets of the law of one. We especially note the one known as Thales and the one known as Heraclitus, those being of the philosopher career, as you may call it, teaching their students. We also point out the understandings of the one known as Pericles. At this time there was a limited amount of visionary information which the Confederation was allowed to telepathically impress. However, for the most part, during this time empires died and rose according to the attitudes and energies set in motion long ago, not resulting in strong polarization but rather in that mixture of the positive and the warlike or negative which has been characteristic of this final minor cycle of your beingness. Questioner, you spoke of an Orion Confederation and of a battle being fought between the Confederation and the Orion Confederation. Is it possible to convey any concept of how this battle is fought? IMRA picture, if you will, your mind. Picture it then in total unity with all other minds of your society. You are then single-minded, and that which is a weak electrical charge in your physical illusion is now an enormously powerful machine whereby thoughts may be projected as things. In this endeavor, the Orion group charges or attacks the Confederation armed with light. The result, a standoff, as you would call it, both energies. Being somewhat depleted by this and needing to regroup, the negative depleted through failure to manipulate, the positive depleted through failure to accept that which is given. Questioner, could you amplify the meaning of what you mean by the failure to accept that which is given? IMRA. At the level of time/space at which this takes place in the form of what you may call thought war, the most accepting and loving energy would be to so love those who wish to manipulate that those entities were surrounded and engulfed, transformed by positive energies. This, however, being a battle of equals, the Confederation is aware that it cannot, on equal footing, allow itself to be manipulated in order to remain purely positive, for then though pure it would not be of any consequence, having been placed by the so-called powers of darkness under the heel, as you may say. It is thus that those who deal with this thought war must be defensive rather than accepting in order to preserve their usefulness in service to others. Thusly, they cannot accept fully what the Orion Confederation wishes to give, that being enslavement. Thusly, some polarity is lost due to this friction and both sides, if you will, must then regroup. It has not been fruitful for either side. The only consequence which has been helpful is a balancing of the energies available to this planet so that these energies have less necessity to be balanced in this space/time, thus lessening the chances of planetary annihilation. Questioner, does a portion of the Confederation then engage in this thought battle? What percent engages? IMRA. This is the most difficult work of the Confederation. Only 4 planetary entities at any one time are asked to partake in this conflict. Questioner, what density are these 4 planetary entities? IMRA. These entities are of the density of love, numbering 4. Questioner, would an entity of this density be more effective for this work than an entity of density 5 or 6? IMRA. The 4th density is the only density besides your own which, lacking the wisdom to refrain from battle, sees the necessity of the battle. Thus it is necessary that 4th density social memory complexes be used. Questioner, am I correct in assuming that both the Confederation and the Orion Group utilize only their 4th densities in this battle, and that the 5th and 6th densities of the Orion Group do not engage in this? IMRA. This will be the last full question as this entity's energies are low. It is partially correct. 5th and 6th density entities positive would not take part in this battle. 5th density negative would not take part in this battle. Thus, the 4th density of both orientations join in this conflict. May we ask for a few short questions before we close? Questioner, I will first ask if there is anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable. I would also really like to know the orientation of the 5th density negative for not participating in this battle. IMRA. The 5th density is the density of light or wisdom. The so-called negative service to self entity in this density is at a high level of awareness and wisdom and has ceased activity except by thought. The fifth density negative is extraordinarily compacted and separated from all else. Questioner, thank you very much. We do not wish to deplete the instrument. Is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? RA, IMRA. You are very conscientious. As we requested previously, it would be well to observe the angles taken by the more upright posture of the entity. It is causing some nerve blockage in the portion of the body complex called the elbows. IMRA. I leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, then, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. 224. The Law of One, Book I, Session 26. February 17, 1981. RA, IMRA. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator. I communicate now. Questioner, is any of the changing that we have done here going to affect communication with the instrument in any way? Is what we've set up here all right? RA, IMRA. This is correct. Questioner, do you mean that everything is satisfactory for continued communication? RA, IMRA. We meant that the changes affect this communication. Questioner, should we discontinue communication because of these changes, or should we continue? RA, IMRA. You may do as you wish. However, we would be unable to use this instrument at this space/time nexus without these modifications. Questioner, assuming that it is all right to continue, we're down to the last 3,000 years of this present cycle, and I was wondering if the Law of One in its written or spoken form has been made available within this last 3,000 years in any complete way such as we are doing now? Is it available in any other source? RA, IMRA. There is no possibility of a complete source of information of the Law of One in this density. However, certain of your writings passed on to you as your so-called holy works have portions of this law. Questioner, does the Bible that we know have portions of this law in it? RA, IMRA. This is correct. Questioner, can you tell me if any of the Old Testament has any of the Law of One? RA, IMRA. This is correct. Questioner, which has more of the Law of One in it, the Old Testament or the New Testament? RA, IMRA. Withdrawing from each of the collections of which you speak the portions having to do with the Law of One, the content is approximately equal. However, the so-called Old Testament has a larger amount of negatively influenced material, as you would call it. Questioner, can you tell me about what percentage is of Orion influence in both the Old and New Testaments? RA, IMRA. We prefer that this be left to the discretion of those who seek the Law of One. We are not speaking in order to judge. Such statements would be construed by some of those who may read this material as judgmental. We can only suggest a careful reading and inward digestion of the contents. The understandings will become obvious. Questioner, thank you. Have you communicated with any of our population in the third density incarnate state in recent times? RA, IMRA. Please restate, specifying recent times and the pronoun, you. Questioner, has RA communicated with any of our population in this century in the last, say, 80 years? RA, IMRA. We have not. Questioner, has the Law of One been communicated in the last 80 years by any other source to an entity in our population? RA, IMRA. The ways of one have seldom been communicated, although there are rare instances in the previous 80 of your years, as you measure time. There have been many communications from fourth density due to the drawing towards the harvest to fourth density. These are the ways of universal love and understanding. The other teachings are reserved for those whose depth of understanding, if you will excuse this misnomer, recommend and attract such further communication. Questioner, then did the Confederation step up its program of helping planet Earth sometime late in this last major cycle? It seems that they did from previous data, especially with the Industrial Revolution. Can you tell me the attitudes and the reasonings behind this? Is there any reason other than they just wanted to produce more leisure time in the last, say, 100 years of the cycle? Is this the total reason? IMRA. This is not the total reason. Approximately 200 of your years in the past, as you measure time, there began to be a significant amount of entities who by seniority were incarnating for learn/teaching purposes rather than for the lesser of the learn/teachings of those less aware of the process. This was our signal to enable communication to take place. The wanderers which came among you began to make themselves felt at approximately this time, firstly offering ideas or thoughts containing the distortion of free will. This was the prerequisite for further wanderers which had information of a more specific nature to offer. The thought must precede the action. Questioner, I was wondering if the one, Abraham Lincoln, could have been a wanderer? IMRA. This is incorrect. This entity was a normal, shall we say, Earth being which chose to leave the vehicle and allow an entity to use it on a permanent basis. This is relatively rare compared to the phenomenon of wanderers. You would do better, considering the incarnations of wanderers such as the one known as Thomas, the one known as Benjamin. Questioner, I am assuming that you mean Thomas Edison and Benjamin Franklin? IMRA. This is incorrect. We were intending to convey the sound vibration complex, Thomas Jefferson. The other, correct. Questioner, thank you. Can you tell me where the entity who used Abraham Lincoln's body, what density he came from and where? IMRA. This entity was fourth vibration. Questioner, I assume positive? IMRA. That is correct. Questioner, was his assassination in any way influenced by Orion or any other negative force? IMRA. This is correct. Questioner, thank you. In the recent past of the last 30 to 40 years, the UFO phenomena have become known to our population. What was the original reason for the increase in what we call UFO activity in the past 40 years? IMRA information which Confederation sources had offered to your entity, Albert Einstein, became perverted, and instruments of destruction began to be created, examples of this being the Manhattan Project and its product. The Law of One, Book I, Session 20.